Welcome to GBC 24. My name is Edward Nyarko. We're going to have an exclusive interview with these illustrious sons of Africa. And we're going to look at Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has been dominating the headlines both in the traditional media as well as social media for quite some time now. And the dust is beginning to settle, but it's not as we expected. I have with me here Dr. Abu Bakar Bako. He's the founding president of Logos Rima Foundation for Leadership Resource Development based in Accra here, and also an economist. I have with me here too Professor Sam Ndoga from Zimbabwe, but based in South Africa. He has a leadership training center by the name Creative Leadership Center. I used to work for University of Pretoria, South Africa. So let's take a look at Zimbabwe. Dr. Abu, by God's grace, gave a prophecy 31st December this year about Zimbabwe. And it's in this book. I'm going to refer to page 62 in this book. And it says that, "Our Lord, I see that you are about to turn the captivity of Zimbabwe. Alas, Zimbabwe, for people had planned to keep in perpetual bondage. But that bondage is broken. I see much. I don't know exactly what it is that you want to do, Lord. But something will happen in Zimbabwe. And from then will be the beginning of the end of every yoke of bondage and the beginning of a new season for Zimbabwe. We declare that settled. Between March and September, it will have been completed. Thank you in the name of the Lord Jesus." Seeing this come to pass, and as an economist and as a man of God, whom God has used in several countries, what exactly was going through your mind when you were seeing what was panning in Zimbabwe?
Well, obviously, the first thing you want to do is say, "You never cease to amaze me, oh God," because at the end of the day, we say what we hear. And it's not about us, it's about God and His own agenda for the nations. So for God to have done what He said, only He knows all the things behind the scenes that were taking place. Since some of it has come into public domain, we understand there had to be all kinds of contacts and negotiations, with the Western world, with China before. So only God knows how it could have happened between March and September before the actual manifestation early November. Of course, there were other things that God has said, 1st of January this year, and then during the fast, I believe it must have been the June or the September, that God gave specific dates, and after October, we'll see clearly that the beginning of the end of slavery for Zimbabwe would have taken place. So how did I feel? I said, God never ceases to amaze me the way He is carrying out His agenda. And let me say here, what that encouraged me to believe more is what I've always said, that God never, and I repeat, never abandons any project, not even projects of nations. Whatever He starts, He will finish. In between, there could be all kinds of things that will be happening. And sometimes you might think, well, it appears God said something and He's not doing it. He's not slow concerning His promises. He will surely come to pass. He will surely bring it to pass. The only difference is that sometimes He gives room for people to change, if it were possible. In this particular case, it was a good thing. Now, talking as an economist, I believe that if we get it right, we would have one of the best nations in the world, because you could see clearly that the most important resource is the human resource. And Zimbabwe has one of the most educated human resources on the continent of Africa. Let's begin with the fact that they are the most literate and most numerate. And hopefully that will translate into true education, where you have life skills, life values, and life virtues to meet every need in the society. So I see an opportunity. My prayer and my sincere wish is that we will not blow it, that we would seize this opportunity to rewrite the history of Zimbabwe much better than we've ever thought it could be. Because if we get it right and harness all the resources, which will include bringing people from all over the world who are Zimbabweans from diaspora, and ensuring that these people have a love and a heart for Zimbabwe, and then they now sit down, structure it, put systems in place to run it, I know definitely there will be all the issues concerning constitutionality of various things, but things can be changed if the need arises. So let me just say in brief, I was excited. At the same time, I was really talking about precaution. That would be the need for people to begin to think of how do we manage this properly. If God says this is the purpose for this shaking, that he wants to remove the yoke, then the people who are going to manage that, midwife it, must understand that.
Talking about resources, there's one area I want us to look at. I read a book by, a summary of it by TV Balpin, a book written by a Zimbabwean journalist. He said that the book is titled To the Banks of the Zambezi. And it says that Zimbabwe was one of the greatest countries created by God first. And to him, he says that granite masses, and I quote him, granite masses are the oldest rocks to be found on earth. Wherever the granite is seen, man can hopefully expect to find gold and other valuable mineralization in the surrounding country. In Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, this mineralization is particularly varied with payable deposits so far found over 60 different minerals. To date, over 100 minerals have since been discovered in Zimbabwe. The other interesting geological feature in Zimbabwe is the structure called the Great Dike of Zimbabwe. You've talked about Zimbabwe, the mineral resources. When you hear these, what are some of the areas that you think that, as you're talking about the need for human resources that need to be harnessed, and these resources as well, what must be done to be able to ensure that we get the best out of all these resources?
Okay, quickly, like I said, if you build the people, they will build the buildings. If you harness the human resource will harness all the other natural resources. And he would probably talk more on the issue of the Great Dike. But let me say here, the last time I checked, Zimbabwe is the only place in the world that has 7 colors of diamonds. 7 colors of diamonds. Now that in itself, diamonds, I don't need to go into details on that. And then if you have over 100 minerals and platinum reserves, and then chrome and all that, apart from South Africa, that's the next place. So then we need to say, okay, how do we handle helping people to properly manage these resources by ensuring they're educated, which is far, far beyond being literate and being numerate. Being literate is just ability to read and write, and numerate is ability to handle numbers. But then how can they translate that into life skills to make the life of every member of the society of Zimbabwe the best? This is my own take. A nation is not considered educated unless her populace is able to harness all the resources within the territory to make everybody's life better and make the nation better, make the communities better. Could it be the reason why, even for the aspect of the so-called coup d'etat, they had some degree of restraint? They did not do what others normally do, where they kill, they do all kinds of things, maim and all that. But I think it will be very important for us to then look at how do we help the average person on the street, because sincerely, and he can speak to that, I don't think that the average Zimbabwean has felt all of the, abundance of the resources in terms of the riches and the wealth of Zimbabwe in their personal lives.
Talking about the Great Dike, he said you can highlight more. So let's look at the mineral resource in Zimbabwe, because we've been told over the years that per capita income wise, Zimbabwe is very poor. But some say Zimbabwe is the richest country on the face of the earth. Is that the case?
Well, it's very true. I think we will have to measure some of the quantities of what there is. But speaking about diamonds, at the onset of the mining ventures, it was discovered that a revenue of over 15 billion a year could be realized from diamonds alone. Now, the current foreign debt that Zimbabwe is carrying is 7 billion. So in a single year, Zimbabwe is capable of writing off their debt,
Balance.
utilizing one mineral. Now, the Great Dike is named such because of the multiplicity of minerals found along that belt. Now, add those minerals to the equation, Zimbabwe can never be a poor country. The sad chapter of most of our African countries is that wherever you find resources, it attracts conflict. The tendency is to now invite outsiders to come and exploit these minerals, and they come with their own agenda, and at the end of the day, people don't benefit as much. Even the development initiated by these organizations or companies does not really add value to the people, but only to their interests. So what we really need to work on is a program that actually says, can everyone thrive in Zimbabwe because of the wealth that God has given us? If we get that right, Zimbabwe can set a new paradigm for African nations to follow and emulate in terms of really turning around economies, because we don't need to be under the yoke of slavery at all.
Not to be under the yoke of slavery. We've seen some of the minerals exploited over the years, but can we say for the past, from 1980 to now, has that been a blessing or a curse to Zimbabwe?
Initially, it looked like it was going to be a blessing. We even had favorable policies that our president had introduced. For example, we have an indigenous policy that says 51% of an investment has to be owned by local people. Any investment. So that policy ensured that you don't have a situation where a foreign entity comes and they have all the say, they can do whatever they want. They're actually a minority shareholder in any entity they would bring in. So that policy actually ensured that when investment would be introduced in Zimbabwe, it could translate to a better scale of beneficiation that could translate to really impacting an average person. However, you will find then that even this policy targets individuals. I can be approached by a company to be that 51% shareholder, and I can get that shareholding in that company, and I can hold that similar shareholding in several companies. So I could say as an individual, I'm benefiting. But how is that policy actually benefiting the general people of Zimbabwe? So while that's a positive move, I'm not sure that it actually boils down to really translating to benefiting the average person. So is there something else, an add-on, for example, to the same policy that says a certain percentage of that is directly remitted to state coffers so that people actually benefit, or people within the community where this resource is being exploited can be direct beneficiaries? So you have a community and a company benefiting at the same time, as opposed to just an individual member. So there are creative ways of looking at policies to ensure that they translate to something better.
Dr. Abu, talking about some indigenization, we've heard stories of the land issue under former President Mugabe. You've been to Zimbabwe several times. How relevant was that policy, and how is it going to be relevant now?
Well, first of all, in terms of what he just finished saying, latching on to that, I think it's important for us to know that if you're talking about benefiting every Zimbabwean, then in addition to what he had already suggested at the level of, the state coffers, then the aspect of the immediate community, then probably the aspect of even education. Now, education as opposed to just literacy and numeracy. If they have a national civics education center, they could do that. But if they don't have a center for civic education, they can find a way of educating the average Zimbabwean how to actually begin to look at all the minerals as an inheritance that has to be built up. I don't give you an inheritance to deplete it. I give an inheritance to a child so that that child, by the time he grows up, that's why they say until he or she is 18, they are not supposed to take over. So that then when they have age, then that becomes a son that can build. Inheritances are supposed to be built, not to be depleted. So that will be an important aspect. Then coming to, what you were asking, the substantive aspect of, okay, you have been there several times. What are some of the things that we can do concerning, the land? So much has been said concerning land. I remember it was Bafo Ankoma of the West African magazine that wrote a couple of years back, concerning the land situation in Zimbabwe. And that was a brilliant article that was based on hard, research with hard facts, where it was clear that actually there was supposed to have been an agreement with the British that there will be a time that land will revert to the original owners, but they kept postponing it from the time of Margaret Thatcher to John Major to now Tony Blair before, the man says, hey, look, you people are joking with us, so I am not going to. But when they finally did the first, second reform actually, that reform that everybody now got to know about, Professor Moyo and Catherine Marshall have a book, a well-researched book that they put out. And they show in that book, and I saw even that from north to south, from south to north, Al Jazeera program, that they were interviewed there, which you can find on YouTube, where they show that actually it benefited Zimbabwe more than when those large-scale farmers were in charge.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it is
When
there.
the whites had left.
Yes, because actually some of the whites, that's a different story. They have come back, some of them that went to Mozambique and, Zambia, some of the other places. Some of them are back. Some of them are even in the value chain, not even back on the land, but the value chain. So at the end of the day, as against the repatriation of surplus that was there before, where you have most of the money that is being made taken back to the home country of the people that are exploiting, these ones who are indigents had so many things that were happening with their people, and even in the value chain, it's still the same Zimbabweans. So instead of one person taking something, it might take about 6,000 people enjoying it. And per capita, there was a rise in the standard of living, a raising of the standard of living, which now led to the rise in their standard of living. So that really turned out to be very helpful. Of course, the average person out there would want to let you know that, well, this was not very good. In fact, Zimbabwe is in the quagmire that she is in because of that. But it's rather the international community that brought Zimbabwe into that. I'm sure he can speak more into that.
All right.
I can add that, for example, one of the biggest foreign earners in Zimbabwe was tobacco. Now, the so-called small-scale farmers have more than matched what was produced by commercial farmers back then. It's a current reality. Now, although the volumes they bring individually may look little, but when they are looked at collectively, you realize that the contribution is actually much the same, if not more, than commercial farmers used to produce. So with that sort of information, the realization is then that more people are directly benefiting from these from the land reform program. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, because the way in which it was executed, which seemed very chaotic and leading to loss of life, we're not necessarily endorsing that. with saying that on the other side, you can now see that if this is properly managed, it has the potential to really uplift the standards of living. When you look across our continent, people grow what they eat. That's very emblematic of Africa. So what people really need are means and ways of doing it at a rate that the benefits are not as trivialized as they are when people use very outdated means of production. So if we modernize the way people farm, for example, using implements that are more up to date, Africa can feed itself. Africa is basically failing to feed itself because we haven't seen the importance of really investing in agriculture. If you compare with some of the figures produced elsewhere, Africa is one continent blessed with so much more than we can describe. Arable land, 60% of the world's arable land, some of it still untilled, is in Africa. Now, Germany can only grow what she can in 3 months where the weather is favorable. By comparison, we can grow anything, anytime,
Year round.
anywhere. So, with that window of opportunity, we really just need to turn our world around by finding direct solutions, best practices that our people can simply adopt. The rest will be history. We can feed ourselves and then in turn feed the rest of the world because we have that potential and capacity that we are currently sitting on. Now, if I can add a little bit of a tangent, what my other observation is that some of our students who go through the Ministry of Agriculture, rather the Department of Agriculture at the university, some of them don't end up being given pieces of land to practice what they've learned. Now, that's one simple way of saying every student who goes through a degree, a bachelor's of agriculture, should be given a piece of land to now put into practice what they've learned. It's almost like they need to look for a job. No, they actually need a piece of land to practice what they've been instructed in. So it's just one small way in which we can start to see turnarounds because they have the know-how. We can come up with solutions that says we give them implements, we give them inputs, we give them whatever they need to have a quick success story. These are some of the things we need to be doing to really turn around our nation.
Yes, back to the land reforms again. What I'm learning from you, both of you, is that there were some positive aspect of that, though the management was not the best.
Yeah.
But why is that what we're seeing in the media was that Zimbabwe was more or less on her knees, looking for food and all kinds of things. We're not being told this side of the story.
Well, you know typically that there's a tendency by journalists to look for bad news, and bad news sells. So you're not necessarily going to focus on the good that's happening out there, because that's not what your agenda is. If your agenda is to find mistakes, problems, you will find them, and they seem to be all over the place. Now, this is not to say there were no hardships in Zimbabwe. As I say, it's a work in progress. What we are seeing are things that can ultimately turn out to be very positive, again, with better managing skills. I'm not even convinced that just because we have a government and we have a minister, things are going to be fine. These ministers, this government, also need input. They need to be educated in such a way that best practices, best ideas thrive. Now, I'm not always sure that we always have the right people writing our policies for us. I'm not even sure that those people are interacting with the best minds there is in a nation. If we are able to do that, at the same time educate our journalists to look for the best stories that add value, I think we'll see so many success stories across this continent. You know, when I travel, there's so many positive things I see. I was at the beach this afternoon here in Ghana, and I saw how fishermen catch fish, and they have a market really waiting there for them. I mean, the produce is already guaranteed because the buyers are waiting at the beach to buy whatever they've caught for the day. And I asked, is there anything you throw away? No, everything is almost bought before it even comes on shore. So I was just marveling at this reality. Imagine if we were to give these fishermen proper fishing boats. Do you think the standards of living would remain the same? Actually, no. But how come we're not hearing reports about these positive developments right here in this beautiful nation that I've been privileged to visit so many times? Because even right here, we have success stories, but they're perhaps not at the level that we are looking at. Even at that minuscule level where there's a glimmer of hope, we can take that and cause it to grow exponentially by just dreaming and empowering our people. Our people work so hard. It's time we equip them to work smart. That would be what I would say.
Dr. Abu, former President Mugabe, Robert Mugabe, was more or less demonized by some media, especially the Western ones. In your view, what are some of the legacies that he's left behind or his things he did that we need to build upon and the new government, under this new government?
Okay, with your permission, two quick, comments latching on to what he just said. Number one, talking in terms of factors of production being looked at more closely and making sure they are the best in terms of enhancing the productivity of the people. So you look at equipment, you look at all the other things, land itself, which you've already highlighted as you ask the questions. Then secondly, the aspect of the land tenure system. We need to look at that, which will tie into what you've just asked me concerning former President, Mugabe. Then the aspect of the land tillage system, because like I said, sincerely, if you talk even in terms of the 60% of the arable land, is actually the 60% of uncultivated arable land of the world that is African. So it means if we can get our people to become more efficient in land use and increasing the productivity of our land, we would be able to affect lives much better and probably feed the rest of the world, because I personally believe Africa is the breadbasket of the world. Now, if you talk about that, incidentally, which is the second point, there is foundations for farming, or it used to be called farming God's way, that was developed in the same Zimbabwe by one Brian Odrive, along with others who are working there. And we realized that somehow they were able to increase productivity per hectare. What people used to have maybe 1, 2, tons per hectare, they were able to take it to 10, and in one case 12 tons per hectare. So it's like you are multiplied by the factor of 10. Not in terms of fertilizer, especially chemical fertilizers, and even the implements that we talk about, modern farming equipment. It's just observing the way God himself has been growing things. Now I ask you the question, which forest have you ever seen that has been deforested without man's intervention? So how does God keep forests for thousands of years? So he discovered God's blanket and some of the other things he talks about, which is not the topic of our discussion per se. I'm just saying that if we can harness what is already there in the system, because you're saying, what should we do? One, he left a legacy of a land tenure system where he was saying, let the land be returned to the original owners. Okay, original owners. Who are the original owners? There will be the need to really establish that properly, because that's one of the challenges with South Africa right now. Because you say, okay, those who will use the land, in their own cases, willing buyer, willing seller, willing buyer. Fortunately, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have worked for them, but that's not the topic of discussion. Coming to Zimbabwe, former President Robert Mugabe, as much as he was demonized, I have already given you one example, but two in one. I said, Professor Moyo and Catherine Marshall happened to have written a book on, the land question in Zimbabwe. And I am encouraging you, viewers, and everybody else, to ensure that you go on YouTube yourself from south to north and check on that particular topic. The interview was on Al Jazeera. And they showed there clearly that rather it happened to have been much better in terms of the effect on the average Zimbabwean. Yes, it is true that some of the cronies of former President Mugabe were the ones that profited. But according to their own research findings, only about 10% of those people, so 90%, were the ordinary people of Zimbabwe. And right there is a lady talking to what Prof talked about earlier concerning those who, graduated from agriculture. A young lady who was actually excited about going back to the land. And she was making it quite big, quite well, let me put it that way. So there was that aspect. Secondly, in terms of even the issues about the currency regime, I would love to see where we have multiple currencies without completely forgetting the Zimbabwean currency. So how they're going to manage it, talking of the new government, they will need to look at it critically, dispassionately, or even if it's passionately, but without necessarily giving room to emotions and sentiments taking over from the issues at stake being analyzed with the necessary competence, with the necessary character that will inform their decisions, and with the necessary chemistry to deal with the right people, and the capacity that we can talk to if the need arises. But let me say here that demonizing somebody is dependent on agenda. You are a journalist. You know about agenda setting. It depends on what it is that you really want to push. That will determine what you report and what you don't report, even when you can see it, because that's not what you set out to prove. You will not report it. So I think going forward, for those of them that are coming in as the new government, who have just been sworn in, especially for the president, it will be important, like I said, that you, one, look for all the people in diaspora that will help build the nation, the best brains, which you have all over the world. Then, two, there will be the need for, targeted strategic mobilization of the citizenry for the various aspects of the economy. Thirdly, there will be the need to make sure you have done a good job of educating everybody right from the top to the lowest citizen as to what is at stake. Otherwise, we'll end up selling our birthright. And you have a situation where people come and they organize a party in your house and you are not invited.
Zimbabwe in the next 10 years, what kind of story do you want us to narrate about Zimbabwe as a Zimbabwean?
I think to just tag on to what Dr. Abu is intimating here, my observation is that our concept of democracy as a system we have used to govern ourselves has not always worked for us. We have a chieftainship system that's inherent in our way of thinking. And a chief is a chief as long as he has capacity to serve and so forth, and he is either replaced by somebody with capacity and so forth, but it's the lieutenants under him who actually serve a nation. I want to use that reference as a paradigm that we can create for a nation like Zimbabwe, to say this idea of just having elections where we vote certain people in and they serve for 5 years. If they make it, then they're given another mandate. If they lose, then a new dispensation comes in, has not always served us well. So what you find is direction is set, and then we are heading in that direction. 5 years down the line, a new system is voted in, and then we abandon everything we've been doing and take a different direction altogether. What I would like to see is for us to have a vision for the nation that says, for the next 50 years, this is where we're going and this is what we want to accomplish. Regardless of who comes in, this is where we're going as a nation. It is, this direction is set. So the best players to help us keep aligned to that vision are the ones that we elect into office. It's not necessarily new players to now come up with a different vision altogether. A vision is something that we can set. When Moses was taking the children of Israel into the promised land, when he was done with his part of his deal, he handed over to Joshua. Now Joshua didn't come and say, forget the promised land, Egypt, we're going. No. He carried on in the direction of the vision that was set before him. That's almost a story you will see even with the Singapore turnaround of the economy. A vision was set for 30 years, like an entire generation was committed to those founding values, and anyone who has come after that has kept on running with that vision. So my view would be not even look at 10 years, look more beyond that. Look at a generation and the next generation thereafter. So by the time this generation is done, we have created enough leverage for the next generation to stand on our shoulders, and they have no excuse but to succeed and excel beyond what we would have done as a people. So it's a vision that will encompass what we can do for the next 50 years.
It's a vision that we can do for the next 50 years. Dr. Abu, the president said we want to make sure there's job creation, the economy is turned around, and therefore he's going to bring on board hitherto people that were driven out of the nation. In your view, the future of Zimbabwe, how does it look like?
Okay. First of all, quickly on the aspect of the 50-year development plan. I call it that way in terms of the vision, because vision is what you see as a clear picture of your future, what you're going to become. Now, so I would first of all ask, do we have a National Development Planning Commission? That doesn't seem to be for Zimbabwe. So that's the first port of call. That would be the need to create one. Then a National Center for Civic Education, so that the average Zimbabwean can be educated in his local language in such a way that the hinterlands, everybody knows what's going on. Because if you have an educated populace, then you will have strategic voters. So whichever system of government we choose to operate in, we need strategic voters, voters who are well educated. They know what they want. So that then they will now bring the right people in, which I agree with him on, that you should have the most qualitative human resource brought in to carry out that vision. So the easiest way to have a vision that nobody abandons, the National Development Planning Commission has a vision that is, for lack of a better word, strengthened by the Constitution, is constitutionalized, that, okay, this is what we're going to do. We have a 50-year development plan that everybody that comes into office has to continue. The only thing you will now campaign on is, this is how I would do it better than the other. Don't come campaigning to me as somebody who is operating a restaurant. I will cook food for you. No, no, we already know. Everybody knows that you're going to cook food. You're going to make roads. You're going to do this like, people say, we'll make roads. In other nations, you already know how many kilometers of road every single administration must add on to, and which number they should also maintain. Is not based on the thing is spoiled. No, this number of years you must maintain. Okay? Then when it comes to the aspect of 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, what do I say concerning the future of Zimbabwe? Well, from the little I know, the one who made all of us, it doesn't matter your religious, leaning and bias, God, who happened to have spoken to us concerning Zimbabwe, and he is bringing it to pass, has shown us that it is going to actually be one of the few examples on the continent of Africa of what a nation should be like. If we get it right, I see a bright future for Zimbabwe. I see Zimbabwe being one that would actually help Africa to know you start by developing your human resource, and then thereafter making sure you strategically position that resource in the most strategic areas of the economy, for the other resources to be harnessed and developed for the common good, not only of your nation, but for even other nations and the continent and continents of the world.
Finally, Prof, I hope you're going to Zimbabwe. Yes. What exactly you want to go and do in Zimbabwe?
I would like to participate. I posted on my Facebook page 48 hours ago that it's time for a new dispensation. I'm going to play my part. My part for now would be to be involved in processes of influence. If there's any gap where I'm allowed to share some of my ideas or participate even as much as I can within government circles, I would like to do that, because I think it's time for as many of us as possible to really start engaging. This is our inheritance. This is our children's heritage. So we need to leave that inheritance in the best possible place for them to thrive, and for everyone after that to thrive. So we shouldn't expect someone else to do it for us. This is for all of us. We are all invited to participate in the turnaround of Zimbabwe.
We've been talking about Zimbabwe. I hope you've been enjoying this program, exclusive program about Zimbabwe. And I had with me here Dr. Abubakar Bako, an economist and founding president of Lagos Rima Foundation for Leadership Resource Development in Accra here. And then Professor Sam Ndoga, a son of Zimbabwe, who is going back home to put his shoulders to the wheel to help move Zimbabwe forward. My name is Edward Nyarko. Make sure that you don't miss out on our next topic, which when Prof comes back, we're talking more about Zimbabwe after he has entered to the land and returned, and see what President Mnangagwa and his team has for Zimbabwe. See you.